All right, we will jump into it. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for Peer Navigators in Practice Lessons from the Field. This is our sort of celebratory end of semester, end of year webinar to look back on the 25-26 cohort of peer navigators through our Student Basic Needs Coalition program. So um, just we're going to start to give you a little bit of context about our team and what we do, and then we'll jump into some background on the program, and then get into all of our exciting reflections and data and all of that good stuff. Um, I also have some folks from this cohort joining me, so I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves a little bit later, and you'll also get to hear some firsthand testimony from their perspective as students and administrators in the program. And then to close, we'll chat about how our findings from this year and our past cohorts have informed the direction that we're moving in, and what the 26-27 application cycle will look like. So um, feel free to, at any time, if you have questions, drop them in the Q&A. Um, I think we have the hand raise feature enabled, so you're also welcome to raise your hand and unmute if you would like to do that. Um, but I will try to be monitoring the chat as we go through so that we can get to any pressing questions. This session is being recorded, so if you have to hop off early for any reason, or if there's anyone that you feel like you would like to share this information with that couldn't make it today, I'll be sending out the link to the recording after we close out. But jumping right into it, my name is Alexis. I am the Director of Campus Engagement here at SBNC. I have been on our team for about a year and a half, and my role is primarily managing our relationships with our campus partners and our community partners, um, and really serving as a thought partner about how we can identify the gaps that exist in basic needs infrastructure within their organizations and how SBNC can help them get creative in closing those gaps. And the other person pictured on this slide is my wonderful colleague, Leanne, who is our Director of Student Support. The Peer Navigator program has really kind of been her brainchild over the past couple of years. Unfortunately, we are both super pregnant right now, and she is on her way to possibly deliver as we speak. So send her all the good vibes, but she is not able to join us today. So I will be the primary point person for at least the next week until I go on maternity leave. But we'll chat more when we get into application cycles and things like that, about who you can get in touch with if you have any questions about the program. Some other faces that you are likely to have seen if you participated in this year's cohort are our wonderful MSW interns, Ashley and Jenna, who served as what we called pod leaders for this year's cohort. So all of our students were divided up between the two of them, and they sort of served as that day-to-day support in problem solving, brainstorming, um, thinking through implementation of all of the creative outreach strategies that our lovely students came up with throughout this year. And jumping right into it, now you know the faces of SBNC, but if you're not familiar with who we are and the work that we do, what is SBNC? We are a national nonprofit that works to ensure that students are identified, enrolled, and supported in public benefits, particularly SNAP and Medicaid, um, and basic needs resources in a more broad sense so that financial insecurity doesn't prevent college completion. So we work towards that mission through three primary focus areas: campus education, policy advocacy, and then, as I mentioned, SNAP and Medicaid enrollment. We currently serve over 100 campus partners in more than 24 states, and we're really, really excited to continue to expand our work and to find new areas of opportunity to serve students and make sure that they are having the experience of higher education that they deserve. One question that we get a whole lot when we talk about the work that we do is why SNAP? Why do we focus so specifically on this program? And the answer is kind of twofold. The first is that research has shown us that when students are triaging their money, right, when they're experiencing financial insecurity, they protect their fixed bills first, right? Nobody's going to not pay their tuition or not pay their rent or not pay their utilities or their car note if they have the option to not pay for something else. So food is really perceived by particularly young people as the only flexible line item in their budget. And so that's the first thing that they cut when their money is tight. But we know that SNAP is the country's most successful anti-hunger program. It measurably reduces food insecurity, which we know to be tied to academic success, persistence, and retention. And also, SNAP is open-ended mandatory spending, which might be a little jargony, but basically what that means is that by law, anyone who qualifies is entitled to those benefits. And federal funding is intended to scale to meet whatever demand it is of folks who are eligible nationally. So, in plain terms, this pot of money is already set aside for this exact purpose. And when an eligible student doesn't enroll or doesn't receive those benefits, those dollars just sit on the table. So that's why we do the work that we do to close what we call the college SNAP gap. The GAO estimates that there are 5 million students in the US that are eligible for SNAP, and that nearly two-thirds of those students are not receiving benefits. Right. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And a big part of the campus education work that we do is to reduce stigma, bust myths, and improve awareness of public benefits, the social safety net, SNAP, and Medicaid as programs in particular, and then other basic needs resources that are available to college students. Um, this chart is from the Hope Center Basic Needs Survey in 2020, and you can kind of see that there's the big reasons that students are not utilizing not only the public and social safety net, but the resources on their individual campuses largely are because they don't think they're eligible, because they don't understand what the eligibility criteria are, and they think that other people are more likely to need these services or um, are more likely to be eligible than they are, or that there is some barrier to the practical pieces of actually completing the application. So that brings us to our Peer Navigator program, which exists to work towards solving all of those big problems. So a little bit of background on the program. It it was started in 2024 in a really small pilot cohort in exclusive to California. And we have grown and expanded a ton since then. Um, but it really is designed to equip student leaders on college campuses to help their peers connect to benefits and basic needs resources, but also to support them in developing professional skills and building collaborative infrastructure on their campuses along their way. So we really desire for this to be a multi-directional relationship, not only with a student, but with their campus, and the way that the system operates in the context of basic needs. So we really are looking at connecting students to these resources, breaking down stigma, raising awareness, supporting systemic and sustainable solutions to basic needs and security, and giving students an opportunity to use their voices and their creativity and their passion to build a more inclusive campus, not only for the students they're serving, but also for themselves. Um, so this year we had what we call a BHAG here in on our team, which stands for our big, hairy, audacious goal of reaching $100 million of SNAP benefits that we aim to connect students to across the country this academic year. So we were looking at between July 1 of 2025 and July 1 of 2026. Um, that's been our goal. It continues to be our goal. We haven't hit July yet. And we are currently a little bit ahead of target, but we'll talk about some of those numbers a little bit later. So that's kind of our big overarching organizational goal that's informed the work that we've been doing this academic year. And for this program specifically, we asked each of our peer navigators to have a smaller goal that works towards that of engaging roughly 10% of their campus's SNAP eligible population. So those were kind of the frameworks that built the structure of this program this year. Um, in terms of some of the administrative logistics, we ran the program in 6 2-week periods each semester um, that combined different learning, action, and internal support from our team. So all of the peer navigators went through bi-weekly group sessions where they were trained on things like advocacy, outreach strategies, got to really connect with each other and bounce ideas off of one another about what was working well on their campuses, opportunities, space to collaborate, really, and develop those skills and stretch some new muscles. And then they also, in the alternating weeks, had one-on-ones with Jenna and Ashley, our pod leaders, to kind of help them think through their goals on their individual campuses, check in on their progress, and really troubleshoot any of the challenges that they might have been experiencing in the individual context of their work. And then the big piece is that we asked all of our students to be engaging in about 3 to 5 hours a week of direct outreach on their campuses. So we had sort of an activity menu of different options that students could pursue, but also gave them a lot of latitude to, like I mentioned before, be creative and think about what made the most sense in terms of their campus culture and context and ways that they could reach their peers. Um, and then a big piece of this work for us is compensation for the work. So this year, SBNC was able to compensate each peer navigator $2,500 for their outreach and engagement on campus. And we find this a foundational aspect of doing this work um, because often we know that the students that are doing peer-led work, whether it's in the basic needs context or not, are often the same students that benefit from the resources they're helping others to access. Um, and the way that I explain the peer navigator model and just peer-to-peer work in general often is it's much easier for a student to digest the message that this is for someone like me when that message is coming from someone like them. Um, and so that's really a foundational piece of our work and the way that we think about this model that we will definitely continue to carry into the future iterations of this program. And then that last piece, evaluation. So we started this year with a goal setting meeting, like I said, with Jenna and Ashley, where students could kind of think about what their goals were in addition to our BHAG, some smaller outreach and engagement goals that they could set for their individual experience through this program. And then we've continued to do some mid-semester and then this week some end of semester reflection points to um, measure their impact and their growth as student leaders on their campuses. So we'll get to see some of that in just a moment. The 2025-26 cohort, as you can see on this map, covered 16 states across the country and captured 31 schools. So there was a really diverse institutional mix that I think reflects where basic needs work is the most needed. So we had 18 community colleges, 5 4-year public institutions, 3 research universities, 3 technical colleges, and 2 4-year privates. Um, our cohort also included 2 HBCUs and 13 HSI designated campuses, and the country's only federally chartered university for the deaf, Gallaudet University. So that diversity was certainly intentional. We wanted to learn what peer-led benefits outreach tools can look like at very different kinds of institutions. Um, and I think that a lot of what we've learned this year is going to shape how we support our campus partners going forward. So, a little bit of a snapshot of our cohort campuses. Um, ass Assuming the conservative national estimate that between 16 and 18% of college students are SNAP eligible, um, and there are 300,000, a little over 300,000 total students on all of the campuses across our cohort. That means there were approximately 38,000 eligible but unenrolled students on the campuses that we worked with this year. And assuming a maximum benefit of $298 a month in SNAP, that's just over $3,500 a year per student, which is well over $100 billion that's being left on the table each year by eligible but unenrolled students. And so that's that college SNAP gap that we are seeking to close. And this year, our peer navigators really put the pedal to the metal. They were able to engage more than 17,000 students across the 31 campuses and make 2 to 3,000 direct engagements. So these numbers are coming directly from their outreach reports, from their experiences engaging in different events and activities on their campuses. And the distinction between those two numbers is that our touch points measure how many students saw SBNC or public benefits or our eligibility screener messaging across both digital and physical channels. And then direct engagements refers more to one-on-one or small group conversations that our peer navigators had where students actually got screened for eligibility, got their questions answered, and took some kind of action. Um, some big highlights. Our students logged over the course of this year 243 distinct activities that we have kind of categorized into three buckets of impact. So the first is scale, getting the word out, right? So that's that largely digital outreach, widespread messaging, um, and they were able through those channels to reach more than 11,000 students, which is roughly 60% of all of the student touch points that we had this year. Um, that second bucket is creativity. So they came up with some really awesome ideas, really leveraged the cultures of their campuses and what they knew about their peers, um, and created formats that made these conversations less intimidating, as opposed to, stopping and having a one-on-one conversation about your level of need. Um, they really created fun environments where students could engage safely, but still get the information that we wanted to get in front of them. And then that third piece is depth. So really getting students across the finish line, not just from, hey, I know that this is a program that exists, or hey, I know that this program might be for me, but really getting them not only to apply, but to actually complete that process and uh, take advantage of the benefits that they're entitled to. So there were some um, activities that, as we did our evaluation, had some what would appear from the data to be lower impact, as in they reached fewer students compared to the amount of time that they were spending on these activities, but they absolutely produced the highest impact. And those really intentional conversations and that continuous support that some of our students were able to offer um, was the highest conversion to completed applications and the receipt of benefits. So the point here is that our navigators didn't run one kind of outreach. They really built a full portfolio. Um, our scale channels got the word out, those creative channels drew students in, and then the depth channels got them across the finish line, which is at the end of the day our primary goal. These are just some snapshots of the different activities that some of our students did. Um, a little taste of what the different spaces on campus that they utilized to get this messaging out. And then some big successes. So I've kind of talked a little bit about this, but um, we really saw that when there was an incentive to engage, students were much more likely to do it. So we had lots of students who put out snacks or prizes or had events and did like raffles, or goodie bags or things like that. Um, our wonderful campus of Union County, New Jersey, put together some really fun goodie bags for one of their events. And our team at Case Western gave out prizes for students who completed the screener and could evidence that they did that. And those were some of our standout events in terms of conversion from awareness to actually completing the eligibility screener. Um, Another piece was that food pantry and community resource integration was really, really important to the success of students' work. Um, our peer navigators who were able to integrate into those systems that already exist tended to be the most successful in getting students to convert again from awareness to some level of action or engagement. Um, and then some big institutional partnerships, particularly with student government or existing related student leadership organizations, gave many more pathways for not only relationship and that like community infrastructure building, but also for funding and for visibility and for access to different levers on campus. Um, and it really turned the individual work of the single peer navigator operating on each of these campuses into an institutional effort. Some challenges, which are kind of the converse of some of these successes. Um, there's a lot, as we know, happening in the national conversation about the public benefit system. Um, and it, particularly given all of the complicated student eligibility criteria, is already kind of a mountain for students to climb. So that confusion around eligibility, around particularly in the fall, the status of SNAP as a program, created some friction for our students. Uh, and at one period or another, that consistently came up for almost every single one of our students. Um, you can see here that there was one student at the University of Akron who had been denied for SNAP 3 times before they were able to connect with our peer navigator, who helped them to kind of get a better understanding of that process and work through that. And that's exactly why this program exists, to create stories and situations like that. Um, some structural barriers limited the reach that some of our students were able to make on campus. Um, there were a few campuses in our cohort, primarily our four-year institutions that are primarily residential, and required meal plans, which made a lot of their students ineligible for SNAP. There are some of our primarily commuter campuses that had the opposite problem, where people were not residential, and so there was lower foot traffic and general student engagement on campuses. Um, Different barriers to accessing institutional channels, which our campus administrators have been really instrumental in helping their students work through. And hopefully you'll hear a little more about that in just a few. But even when students were doing everything right, there are just some things about the structure of the institution of higher education, um, that made their work a little more challenging. And so those are some things that we're really thinking through as we go through this end of semester reflection, um, about how we can structure what we as an organization offer, to make those things a little easier and maybe front load some of that work to reduce those barriers. And then the last thing, going solo was hard. We heard a lot from our peer navigators that it was really, really difficult to be one person doing this work, and trying to access so many other students. But that is particularly why we leverage this partnership model. We encourage them to make connections on campus. Um, and like we heard in our successes, that those institutional relationships they were able to build were really integral to their success. So what does that look like in practice? These students that were working in our Peer Navigator program were ultimately working to get eligible students screened for their eligibility, to understand that they are eligible, and then ultimately to apply. And so of the potentially 38,000 students across our campus, right, we had that 10% goal. We were able to reach more than 3,200 students, which is really, really close. So we're super, super proud of that number. And of those 3,273 students that screened eligible across our cohort, 78% of them were SNAP eligible and 45% screened Medicaid eligible. Um, and so we were able to connect students to a potential $9 million in SNAP benefits over this academic year, which is absolutely amazing. Um, I do see a question in the chat, so I'll get to that. Um, it says, these results are exciting. Did your assessment of peer outreach activities shed any light on the number of interactions required to result in application submission? That is a great question. It didn't necessarily. I don't think that we specifically tracked how many times our navigators interacted with like individual students over time to get them across that finish line. But I would definitely be curious to hear if there is anything that our students can share in terms of their personal kind of qualitative experience of what that might have looked like. I do definitely know just from the conversations that we've had within the cohort that there tended to be some frequent flyers to the weekly outreach that our students were doing. Um, but yeah, that is something that we can look at tracking next year. Um, what that like continued engagement and the longevity of those relationships looks like. So thanks for that question. Um, and that is actually a great segue because I am going to turn the floor over to our lovely students first. So we have Siva and Lauren joining us from UT Austin and Austin P, respectively. And so I will stop talking because I've been doing that for a long time and let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how this year has gone for them. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A as they're talking. All right, Siva, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Siva and I'm a sophomore public health major at UT Austin and I'm really glad to have participated in the SBNC program. I feel like I've learned so much about federal benefits like SNAP and WIC that wouldn't have otherwise happened if this opportunity wasn't there in the first place. And I guess like I can try answering the Q&A question that was in the chat based on my personal experience, I feel like it wasn't really the number of interactions that made a difference, but it was more of the quality of interactions that I had with individuals when I was tabling because they could have just came by and grabbed a snack just because like they saw a snack on the table, but if I didn't talk to them in the first place about the SNAP advising sessions that UT Outpost, our food pantry offers, that then they wouldn't have applied in the first place. So I think it's more of having those in-depth conversations that really caused them to take that next step than it was just having that number of interactions.
Hello, my name is Lauren. I am a junior at Austin Peay State University. And for my experience, I definitely would say it depends on the campus. So at Austin Peay, we pride ourselves in having over 100 student-led organizations. So the problem with that is we're a small fish in a big pond. So consistency, when we had like weeks dedicated to tabling with different themes, we find that we got more interaction by simply being consistent. So if a student couldn't stop by Monday, they have the opportunity to see us again Tuesday or Thursday. And I think that definitely helped because it's kind of like putting yourself in their faces, but they start to remember you over time, be like, oh, this table can help you, and refer their friends to us.
That's awesome. Um, I know we kind of went over some like general cohort successes and challenges. Can y'all talk a little bit about individually on your campuses what was the most successful in terms of strategy for you? And then maybe some like barriers that you faced that other students that are following in your footsteps might want to be aware of.
I think our campus is really similar to Lawrence campus in that we have so many different student organizations. We have a huge student body too, and everyone's trying to compete for the attention of students. And it's really difficult to get them to talk specifically about SNAP benefits when there's so many other organizations that are trying to grab their attention as well. And one strategy that really helped with that was organizing a resource fair in collaboration with UT Outpost and with some other food resource organizations that are on campus. We are able to bring all of these like housing needs and student basic needs things into one resource fair. That way, students were able to stop by and learn about what options they have for basic needs when it comes to housing and food. And there are incentives such as games and snacks as well, which is what motivated them to come. And because we have so many organizations, it was nice to collaborate with them rather than compete for their attention.
For ours, some things that went well is we did about 3 weeks total this school year. So we had Hunger Homelessness Awareness Week, and then we do our SNAP tour. I believe we did one last semester too, but it's helpful because we spend like a week and a half dedicated to tabling in different buildings. So like different College of Business, the Science Building, the library. Those were very helpful because we got different ranges of students because some students that commute only go to their classes and go straight back home. So by targeting those different buildings and really taking the time to like talk to them was helpful because we got to reach a large amount of students. One thing I'd say our school struggled with is it feels like our institution is not made to make food accessible. So our campus requires a meal plan, and a lot of students don't know that if they apply for a certain meal plan, they can still be eligible for SNAP benefits. They don't really make that available or accessible over breaks, winter break, and spring break and fall break. You cannot use your meal plan on campus, and they have limited food availability. So the struggle with that is we have students that have meal plans and are still hungry but aren't eligible for SNAP because they can't use those meals. And also, our DHS will go back and turn students SNAP off unexpectedly and not notify them, or they'll call the third party dining services and ask them questions that they shouldn't be asking them. That's not the proper chain of command. So we've had to work with the Tennessee Department of Justice to work with a legal team to ask, like, are they supposed to be asking the students this? Are they supposed to be calling Sodexo? And so we've had to work with that because many students have been unrightfully, that's not unlawfully denied because of the questions they were asking and the third parties they were contacting.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for being committed to working on that because I know that that's made a big difference in not only on your campus, but just, the state landscape of how college students are handled in this system. Siva, was there anything that was like a surprise like that to you that, either you as in your peer navigator work or students who are navigating this system found to be like unexpected about engaging with basic needs?
Our campus doesn't require meal plans, so we don't really have that same issue when it comes to things like that. But another issue that I saw a lot of people encounter or heard them encounter was being able to meet that minimum work requirement, especially when some of them for like grad school may have to do unpaid internships. That's when it kind of gets a little more complicated about what counts towards that work requirement that's needed to be able to receive benefits.
Yeah, I think that came up across quite a few campuses, even outside of Texas. And that's another part of the reason why that advocacy work is such a big pillar of SBNC's overarching model. Because, first of all, we wouldn't know those things without having the firsthand experience of students like you who are, boots on the ground, making these connections and having these conversations. But there's a lot of opportunity to bring that to the table with folks who have the levers to pull to make change in those like policy and legislative and like administrative pieces of the puzzle. Um, and yeah, I definitely echo the sentiment somebody just dropped in the Q&A, not a question, but just a comment. Incredible work to both of you. And you two should be super proud of what you have achieved. So I definitely echo that. And we, as an organization, as a team, are super proud of you all. Um, and we thank you for taking the time to share with us today. Do either of you have any closing thoughts? Um, and if not, then we will pass it over to our campus admins.
My closing thoughts for anyone interested in applying, if you have a student in mind for the to fill in this position, is to be very adamant and be very persistent. Persistence is key because I know for our campus, our admin were hoping that we would just drop it. If you have to be persistent in your advocacy, it's to a point where students will tell me anything hunger related. RAs were coming to me telling me that they couldn't use their meal plan despite being required to be on campus over spring break and they were hungry. And they opened everything from 8 to 1 and that was it for the rest of the day. And so I took that to our admin and we worked on that. We worked to contact people is by being very passionate about your goal and be very clear about what you want your campus to look like and the students you would like to help.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that and say another important thing is to really be comfortable when it comes to rejection because I know we reached out to so many people within student government or like with our financial aid office about sending out a mass email to students regarding giving out SNAP advising sessions. And there's just been so many times when we weren't able to get a response from them or able to contact them. But don't give up when you face those certain kinds of situations and instead try to see if there's an alternative avenue that you can use instead.
Amazing. Fantastic advice from both of you. And thank you again for your work this year and for sharing your perspectives with us. I'm now going to hand the proverbial mic over to our campus admins, Melissa from College of DuPage and Sammy from College of Saint Scholastica. If y'all want to introduce yourselves and then just kind of jump into some reflections.
I will go first. Hi, I'm Melissa. I work at the College of DuPage in Illinois. I actually stumbled across this opportunity. One of my colleagues sent it to me on LinkedIn, and I had never heard of SBNC. Little to say, I was very excited to put my name in the hat, and we got the grant, and I had somebody in mind. Part of my role as I'm a program manager is linking students to benefits. So I was very familiar with the SNAP process, very familiar with Medicaid, the application, what was needed, all of those things. And so this directly aligned with what I already did. I will say in the beginning, it was difficult to see where our attention should be focused. And once we figured that out, we just kind of hit the ground running.
Hi everyone, I'm Sammy at the College of Saint Scholastica up in Minnesota. We have been connected with Student Basic Needs Coalition for a few years now, but this is our first year having a peer navigator. We were also thrilled to be able to be part of this kind of new initiative that you guys were working towards. So super exciting. My role at the college is I am in the campus ministry department. So we do broad student support services, but we oversee hunger resources on our campus. So that's kind of how the peer navigator role fell into my supervision.
Awesome. So Melissa, I heard you say that in the beginning it was maybe a little bit difficult to figure out where you needed to focus your attention. Because we know that basic needs, right, is a big umbrella. And there are a lot of problems to solve, both in that context and just generally on a college campus, and not a lot of capacity or resources to do that. So can you talk a little bit about maybe what that process looked like for you and your peer navigator and figuring out how to prioritize and what issues you did tackle on your campus?
Absolutely. So we also have a pantry on campus, and kind of started to focus on that first, just because that is the population that we already identified as being food insecure. And so I partnered with the fuel pantry manager and got all of the materials out. We started with flyers, and on our campus, we have bulletin boards that are specific to student outreach. And so all of our materials that we post have to go through marketing. So that for us was a little bit challenging because the materials provided by SBNC were great, but because they weren't through our marketing brand, we had difficulty getting those approved to put them in those like more public common spaces for students. So that was a challenge at first, and then we started tabling in different locations, and so we peer navigator Vivon, he tabled in front of the fuel pantry. It is by one of the more main entrances to the campus. So we actually have a pretty large campus, and we are a 100% commuter college. And so you saying that earlier, saying about how, students come to class and then they might leave, it shares a little more insight with me, just because looking at the different areas and looking at where people might be coming in and where are they going to feel more comfortable. That was a recurring feedback that I got, was students feeling uncomfortable or maybe feeling shameful to talk about food insecurity, because it wasn't behind a closed door, it was at a table. So what we did was we took we have a QR code for the eligibility screener, as does I think everyone. So we put it everywhere. We put it on the flyer. We made magnets, we made stickers. And so when we did that, it wasn't until this spring that we did that. Um, we took them to every department. So I gave them to all of the academic advisors, all of the counselors in the financial aid office, like really trying to target where are these students maybe going who are facing these common challenges.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do just want to flag for you and for all of our attendees that clearly it worked, because College of DuPage had the highest screener to conversion rate in the entire cohort this year, which
Yay!
we're super proud of and super grateful for all of the work that you all put into that. So you had 246 students that Vaughn engaged in direct outreach with, and 116 of those students completed the screener, and then 82 of those students are on the SNAP roadmap so that they've advanced through some stage of the process. So
Amazing.
that's definitely a testament to the amount of time and intention that you all put into, um, leaning into that engagement and getting in front of students, meeting them where they are. So thank you for that. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. And Sammy, I know that St. Scholastica and SBNC had a relationship that existed prior to your engagement in this program. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about maybe how that has informed the work that you've done in this context, and maybe like what you learned about your campus and the students that you were trying to reach this year from the tools and resources and engagements that you've had with us prior.
So last year was the first year that I personally had a more official relationship with SBNC. And that looked like some educational sessions that we had, like training sessions that were open to my department and other student supports on campus. And they were recorded so we could share them with those personnel afterwards if they couldn't attend the Zoom meetings. But a lot of it was just background info on SNAP eligibility because it is not commonly known. And on our campus, we're a smaller campus. We don't have like a basic needs department or anything like that. It really falls on student support staff like campus ministry and counseling services and advisors and the dean of students. So having all of those kind of key supports on our campus know about SNAP eligibility was really helpful. And we did a small piece of advocacy just by starting to advertise the screening tool last year. It definitely wasn't as successful as this year having a student doing that as a peer navigator, but we at least had access to the posters and access to the screening tool. I'm really excited to compare last year's numbers to this year's just to see what kind of growth and testament to peer navigators it will show.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do want to say to your point that like y'all are one of the smaller campuses in our cohort, but that does not speak at all to your ability to make impact. St. Scholastica had one of the highest SNAP eligibility rates in the entire cohort. So it was almost 82% of the students that were screened eligible for SNAP, which is much higher than the national average that we see. So speaking to not only need in the campus population, but also just to your effectiveness in targeting the students that needed this information the most and making sure that those were the ones that were going through this process. Um, so we definitely appreciate that work from you all as well, because um, yeah, like you said, I know that it's harder to do when there's not like dedicated infrastructure or one space that owns the work. Um, but I think that y'all have done a really good job of getting creative about connecting with students in the ways that they can best hear you. Um, is there
Thanks, Lex.
anything? Yeah. Is there anything that, like I asked the students, that was maybe surprising to you that came up this year, or just generally as you've been kind of working through the experience of this program?
I'll go first. So just you saying, bringing it forward that so many of our students were eligible, I think part of that was kind of the targeted outreach. This year, the Peer Navigator did a lot of broad outreach, but starting last year, we implemented some more specific, like targeting. So any student who utilizes our food pantry on campus or any of our hunger resources, we try to include the SNAP screening link in their email response just from that generic email address. So I hope that helps. And we also included the screening tool in our, like once a semester, we send out the hunger resource kind of email campus wide. So we included it in that as well. And I think most students who are reading that email are students who are likely eligible. So I think that was helpful.
I envy that. Just gonna say that the visibility sounds like your campus was very um, receptive to your outreach efforts. Ours were took a little more time. I just put the QR code in my email and I was like, well, worst case scenario, somebody might see it or forward it on to somebody else, just to get that visibility. And that was, I guess, for me, the biggest surprise was because again, part of my role is being a benefits navigator and helping individuals sign up for those benefits, but learning the gap, I guess, of just not having the knowledge of what SNAP is, especially when the policy changed the February 1st about the college exemption. I had students coming to me like, I my SNAP benefits were shut off. I don't know what to do. And so just again having that outreach available to them and having like being able to direct them to SBNC directly is amazing because the DHS office it can take some time to actually like get to somebody. I don't know that I fully answered the question, but I'm just going off of what Sammy said.
No, that is great. Um, do y'all have any final thoughts that you would share with future administrators in your position, or just anyone, that is interested in engaging with this program in the future?
As an administrator, I would just say to be collaborative with the peer navigator. I know on our campus we had several meetings like right away at the beginning of fall semester of what our vision was and what our kind of goals were going to be. And I think that helped us, succeed in reaching some of those goals this year and getting the word out. Of course, there were challenges this year in particular. So just being persistent and trying to stay positive through those challenges, I think, is another piece of advice that I'll end on.
And just to piggyback off of that, I first of all do it. Absolutely do it. It is amazing. It's going to help a student out with their finances and then help potentially thousands of other students gain access to what is already in our economy. But more so, looking back, I wish we had gone in front of student clubs sooner. So as a result of this work, Thrive COD was started. And through that, we were able to collaborate on several different events, marketing, because students have more access to marketing ability than staff do. So we didn't face as many barriers with that. We could just kind of be like, oh, it's a club thing and put it wherever we wanted to. So yeah, I wish looking back, we would have gotten, I guess, more involved with other clubs and gotten in front of them um, sooner rather than later.
Thank you both. I appreciate you sharing all of your insights. And I think that that ties really well into the feedback that we've gotten just overall, from our admins this semester and from our students. So there are a lot of things that we learned this year, and I think that this year in particular has been a really special one to be doing the kind of work that we're doing. But some of the bigger things were that integration beats isolation, right? And I think that we've heard a lot of that, like getting in front of other organizations, collaborating with the food pantry, um, building your own organizations to kind of own this work, and really embedding in existing student services, uh, produced the highest results in terms of getting students in front of the screener, but also just produced a longevity of relationship that is going to ultimately create a stronger student support system on all of these campuses. The other thing is, right, outreach scales when it's owned on campus. So those higher impact activities, those engagements that students were having that were most likely to convert into applications and benefits received came from getting into those campus channels. And it wasn't the like one-off events. It was exactly like Lauren said, the consistency, the showing up in the same place that we know that students are going to be, um, and really embedding yourself in the infrastructure of campus. Um, because students, while depending on the campus context, might have more or fewer opportunities for access to those channels. Either way, they can't do it alone. There is no way that one student on a campus of 10,000 is going to be able to directly engage every student that needs to hear this information. Um, it really requires institutional investment and support, and the sustainability of this work is dependent on it being able to find a home somewhere. Um, so that's one of the big things that I think we're taking away from this cohort. And the last is that eligibility across the cohort is a lot higher than we expected. I think we found in our individual conversations with the leaders doing this work that they were often surprised by how many students were screening eligible, by how many students were high need in their campus population. Um, we were looking at 74% of community college students and 82% at our four-year private institutions. And if you think back to what I mentioned in the beginning about those national statistics, both of those numbers are higher than the national average. Um, so the opportunity is certainly bigger than any one student or any one campus administrator can meet alone. And that's exactly why we operate on this coalition model to connect the folks who care about doing this work well and give them the opportunity to collaborate with one another. And that brings us to where we're going. So for 2026, 27, we're kind of putting a new spin on the Peer Navigator model. Um, and so we're kind of thinking about this um, as a direct partnership between SBNC as an organization and a campus that is interested in doing this work. So we are really going to take a lot of ownership of providing the platform, including our Navi tools, the training, the templates, the toolkits that kind of answer all of those questions that this year's cohort might have had to struggle a little bit more to find the answers to. Um, and we're really just asking campuses, like I said, to provide the home, right? To hire their students, to support them with whatever infrastructure makes sense for the context of their campus, um, and then to bring that local knowledge, that trust, the ability to navigate the institutional barriers that might arise on their particular campuses. Um, so we're really moving more toward a campus-owned approach. Um, I think that in the past, what we've seen is that SBNC has taken a lot of ownership of like the administration of the students in terms of supervision and curriculum and training, and we really, really want to empower the folks who care about doing this work on their campuses um, to be able to build a toolkit of language to do that for themselves. Um, and the logic behind our model has really never changed. We know that we use this peer navigator system because students trust other students. Um, that if we're putting them in front of the folks who need this information, they're more visible, more trusted, more culturally responsive than the institution or the administration, as students might often refer to it. But when we can find ways to combine that student leadership with campus relationships and with infrastructure and access, um, we're really able to make some much deeper impact. So basically what has changed is when we started this program back in 2024, we directly recruited, hired, trained all of our student navigators in that first California cohort. Um, and it was really like a grassroots student activist model that we were using. They were on our payroll. Um, we were interfacing with them weekly. Um, and like I said, we internally took a lot of ownership of the administration of the program. There were benefits to that, but also we realized very quickly how important those institutional relationships are, and how much we needed buy-in from a champion on campus, somebody who could be dedicated in their role as a staff member to advancing the work that the students were doing and elevating the passionate and creative ideas that they had. Um, so this year we moved towards this cohort model, this campus partnership, where we provided micro grant funding to each of these campuses, and they provided, like I said, that institutional context and support. And so for next year, we're really moving towards um, the campuses employing, supervising their students directly, and then again, us providing that resource support and infrastructure through data that makes the work possible. So thinking about, is your campus a good fit? If you're interested in taking advantage of this opportunity for the 26-27 year, Some of the things that might make a campus successful in this model are having student population with demonstrated benefits eligibility. So if you have a high percentage of Pell eligible students, if you're a community college, if you have a high proportion of working or parenting students, or otherwise students with high unmet need, um, if you have or you are an administrative champion, right? Someone who's already in a role that naturally aligns with the kind of work that we're doing in this model, um, or if you have the capacity to build it into a system on your campus that already exists, and also the capacity to supervise the student doing this direct outreach work. Um, Access to communication channels, right? Because like Melissa identified, the work gets a lot harder if you have great ideas and you have great resources, but you're not allowed to implement them. So ensuring that you understand what the approval channels or the processes look like on your campus, and that the students you're working with are actually going to have those levers to pull once they get into the work. And then a commitment to institutionalizing the role. So we talked about our commitment to making sure that the students are equitably compensated for the work that they're doing. And that compensation isn't always monetary. Um, so we've been doing a lot of work around um, the federal requirement that 7% of work study allocations be dedicated to community service work. A peer navigator role would fall under that requirement. So if you have federal work study infrastructure, um, that's free money for a student to be able to engage in this space. And we're happy to talk through maybe what that looks like and how we build that out for your campus in particular. If there are existing student employment roles that align, if there's internship infrastructure, either academic or paid internship, or some other departmental budget, SGA funding, aligned student leadership roles. Um, there's a lot of ways to identify not only what students might be a good fit for this work, but also how we can make sure that, like I said in the beginning, that it's a reciprocal and mutually beneficial relationship that builds towards sustaining the work independent of our involvement in it as an organization. Um, the data from this year's cohort also points pretty clearly to some institutional contexts where this model produces the strongest outcomes. So we've seen a lot of success at minority serving institutions, community colleges, and then sort of medium-sized urban institutions, um, particularly those four-year privates. Um, but that being said, we are not exclusive in our application process. If you're interested, but not sure if you're a good fit, we definitely encourage you to apply regardless, and we're here to support you and answer any questions that you might have. Um, and with that being said, I know that we are a little over time, so if folks have to hop off, you are welcome to. But if there is anyone that has questions about this year's cohort, the application process, anything like that, I will hang on for a few minutes. I'm going to actually switch to this slide. If you are interested in starting your application today, it is officially live. You can find it at that QR code or at the bit.ly link, bit.ly/PN26-27. If you are registered for the webinar, I will be emailing all of this information out afterwards, so don't feel like you have to scramble to get this down. Um, and then that is also my email address if you would like to set up some time to chat more about the potential for this work on your campus, or if you have any lingering questions um, after this session, feel free to reach out to me. I think I mentioned next Friday is my last day before I go on maternity leave. So if you email me and you don't get me, you will get my out of office that'll direct you to the right person on our team. But application, like I said, launches today and will be reviewed on a rolling basis through the summer. and we'll launch our cohort officially starting in September. So we look forward to hopefully seeing some returning and some new faces in that group. And thank you all again so much for joining us, for spending your Friday afternoon uh, listening to us chat about basic needs and student support. And I hope you all have a great weekend. I am going to leave this here. I'll leave the room open just for a few more minutes um, in case folks have questions or want to capture this slide for future reference. But you all are free to go and enjoy your weekends. Um, and thank you again.
I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you for having me here, and I wish you the best and a safe delivery before you go on maternity leave.
Thank you so much.
Bye.